Today's daf is daf Tesvav. Let's just review the Toshma in the brisa that's quoted on the bottom of daf Yudal and Omid Beis. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri made a statement that Hey Halacha Zu Ravachas B'Yisrael. How is it that in order to be kovea, that there shouldn't be a michshol, we could work out a takana, a system that would satisfy both Beis Hillel and Beit Shammai as far as Tzaras Erva is concerned. He says, on the one hand, Nasa K'divrei Beit Shammai, if we're going to require Yibum in the case of a Tzaras Erva and follow the Shita Beit Shammai, Havlad Mamzel Divrei Beis Hillel, Nasa K'divrei Beis Hillel, and if we're going to say that the Tzaras Erva goes out l'shuk without any chalitza, then pogum l'kuhuna, Vlad pogum l'kuhuna l'divrei Beit Shammai. And therefore, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri recommended that both in a sakin lehem litzaros, sheyu choltzos. Now we're on the top of Tesvav and Aleph, lo misyabmos. Chalitza should not bother the shita of Beis Hillel, but would satisfy Beit Shammai, and will prohibit Yibum, which would make Beis Hillel very happy, and Beit Shammai will be satisfied with Chalitza. However, unfortunately, although Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri had this idea to institute this takana, he wasn't able to do so in his lifetime, and they weren't able to institute this takana. Omalo Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel turns to Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. Ma naselem litzaros harichonos me'atu. What's going to be that if in the past Tzaras Erva were allowed to have Yibum according to Beit Shammai, and what are we going to do now? All the children from those marriages of the Tzaras Erva are mamzerim. We're not going to be able to fix that up. It's too late for that. Again, according to Beit Hillel, they're mamzerim. And you want to be machriya in such a way that you avoid, any problems. So the Gemara concludes, we had a machlokas whether or not Beit Shammai actually implemented their shita regarding a Tzaras Erva. If you're going to say asu, hainu to karma, we understand Rav Shimon Gamliel is up in arms. Ma nasa l'tzaras rishonos. Those are all mamzerim according to you, Beit Shammai, meaning the children are mamzerim. Iyamrit lo asu, but if Beit Shammai were mavatal ledas to das Beis Hillel, and they never actually implemented a yibum in the case of Tzaras Erva, is my na manasa. Why did Rav Shimon Gamliel pick up his hands and say manasa? And the Gemara rejects this proof. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, really lo asu Beit Shammai kidivreim. And the intention of Rav Shimon Gamliel in his argument to Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri was not regarding the Bnei Tzaros, the children that came from the Tzaras Erva after Yibum. Lo nitzracha, what was his chashash? Ella litzara atzma. And he's worried about the tzara herself, not the children, but the tzara. Umanasa. Now we understand what Rav Shimon Gamliel said to Rabbi Yochanan when he said Manasa. Hachikom. Hanach tzaros de Beis Hillel le Beit Shammai hechiav navidle. On the contrary, he was asking, what are we going to do from Beit Shammai's perspective with regard to the tzaros of an erva that got the ruling of Beis Hillel that they were allowed to get married without chalitza, without chalitza, and you could say that already after they got married without chalitza, you want to make a takana and ask the yavam to be choletz. Choletz, a woman who's now married to another man, is mimasei agavrayu. This is going to create a tremendous tension in the marriage. I mean, why does a man want to be married to a woman who needs chalitza? Ribbon Shalom, if she needs chalitza, then he has no right to be married to her. and she really doesn't need chalitza according to Beis Hillel because Tzaras Erva doesn't need chalitza. But now you want to satisfy Beis Shammai, and therefore you want to require chalitza. That's going to almost bust up a marriage. And you may ask me, so why do we have to be so concerned about this? Because the Torah says, we're not going to set up a halach in such a way that it's going to undermine a marriage. And to require chalitza when a man is already married, that's not something that we can tolerate. Oshma, again, we want to prove that Beit Shammai osu kidivrein. The Omer Rabbi Tarfon te'evni, I have a taiva, masai tovo tzoras abbas liyodi vesa ena. In other words, Rabbi Tarfon is a Talmud of Beit Shammai, and he wants to implement the halacha like Beit Shammai, meaning to marry a tzoras erva. Now, how is he dreaming about such a scenario that he would actually marry a tzoras erva? So the answer is, at least according to the Gemara's understanding now, his brother, that's Rabbi Tarfon's brother, had married Rabbi Tarfon's daughter, which means, and let's say he had another wife as well. So, which means that if, again, I don't think that Rabbi Tarfon is dreaming about his brother dying without children, but he's creating a theoretical model here that if his brother, let's put it this way, I'll say it a little differently to be more edel about, if the wives of his brother would fall for Yibum to him, one of whom is his daughter, then he could be B'yamim, the other wife, and be B'kayim mitzvah Yibum with the Tzaras Erev, Tzaras Bas. But we see clearly that he is following in the footsteps of Beit Shammai and interested in implementing Beit Shammai. So this would support the opinion of Asu Kidivreya. Gemara says, no, that's not a proof. Emo, what he really means is Ve'asi ena. He's saying that I will marry her off without chalitza, the tzaras erva of his bas. And he really passed like Beis Hillel. I mean, this is a little bit strange because Rabbi Tarfon was in fact a Talmud of Beit Shammai. So I don't know exactly why he's, dreaming of the day that he can implement halacha like Beit Shammai and let it tzaras erva get married lashuk without chalitza. Gemara asks, "Vota evani ka omar." Rabbi Tarfon had a tremendous hishtalkukus, a tremendous desire. Now, if he wants to be knowing like Beis Hillel, I mean, what's the big deal? I mean, that's everybody's knowing like Beis Hillel. That's not a chiddush. So Gemara answers, La Fukim and Rabbi Yochanan and Nuri, who wanted to require chalitza kedivrei Beit Shammai to satisfy Beit Shammai, have the tzaras ever receive chalitza, and now what Rabbi Tarfon is waiting for is to set free the tzaras erba without chalitza, like Beis Hillel, to show that we're not like Rabbi Yochanan and Nuri, and we have to satisfy the shita of Beit Shammai. Tashma Ma'isa b'bito shel Rabbi Gamliel. Shaisa Nesuli Abba Achiv. So the brother of Rabbi Gamliel is Abba, and Abba marries the daughter of Rabbi Gamliel, which is fine. Umeis below Banim. And Abba died without any children. V'yivem Rabbi Gamliel es Sarasa. Right, so now two women are falling for Yibum to Rabbi Gamliel, one of whom is his daughter, and the other is a tzara. And Rabbi Gamliel, as a Talmud of Beit Shammai, went ahead and he implemented Beit Shammai shita, and he was miyabim at tzaras erev, tzaras bas. So it's clear now that Beit Shammai would not mavatal ledas to accept Beis Hillel, but rather also k'divrayim. So the Gemara rejects this as v'tizbra. How are you going to understand the actions of Rabbi Gamliel, even in the light of Beit Shammai? Rabbi Gamliel mitalmidei Beit Shammaihu? You're making a mistake if you think that Rabbi Gamliel was a Talmud of Beit Shammai. He was not a Talmud of Beit Shammai. He was actually a descendant of Hillel, and he was an advocate to be noeg like Beis Hillel. Elo, we have no choice. But we have to assume that this is a case of a tsaras erva who's not a tsaras erva. And that's why Rabbi Gamliel was miyabe, the tzara of his daughter. How so? Shiny bito Rabbi Gamliel, the island is having. Now, even though the bas is an erva to her father, of course, but in this case, she would not pater up a tzara, even according to Beis Hillel. And the reason for that is because she was an islandess. And in the case of an islandess, we had a Gemara back on Daf Beis Amud Beis. If the erva turns out to be an islandess, then the tzara is muteres. And that's why Rabbi Gamliel was makir the tzaras bito for Yibum. So the Gemara asks, only the Acherim introduced this element that the daughter of Rabbi Gamliel was an islandess. Michlal, we can be medayik from that. The Tanakama Sovra the Lav islandess. Tanakama is working with the assumption that the bas of Rabbi Gamliel is not an islandess. And once again, we have to ask the question: how could Rabbi Gamliel be miyavim the tzara of his own daughter? And we're assuming now that Rabbi Gamliel, as a descendant of Beis Hillel, was certainly noik to Beis Hillel. So the Gemara answers that we should understand the Tanakama and the Acherim in the light of the following issue: Hikir bavalo, hikir ba, hikir beinayim. Tanakama holds that the only heta that we could have for the tzara in the case of an erva who's an islandess is a case of kishalo hikirba. In other words, let's talk about Abba, the brother of Gamliel. He married Gamliel's daughter. As it is, she is an islandess. She turns out to be an islandess, but he didn't know that. If he didn't know that, therefore, his marriage is considered a kedushay tos, and it's oto meikara. So therefore, the tsaras islandess, the tzara of Rabbi Gamliel's daughter, was never actually a tsaras erva, because she was never a tzara together with an erva, because the bas was not a valid kedusha. She was never actually married. The whole kedusha was kedushay tos, and that's what's called iglay milsa deli olam lav tsaras zulazuhavia. And this was the case where Abba married the daughter of Gamliel without even suspecting that she was an islandess. But in a case where he knew she was an islandess, and he married her from deswegen, then the tzara is a tzaras erva. And of course, Rabbi Gamliel would not have been miyabim with tzaras erva. The Acherim hold that even in the case of hikirba, and there's no kedushay tos, he knew that she was an islandess up front when he married her. Nevertheless, the tzara is not asura b'yibum. She doesn't fall for yibum. She, as a tzara, was never in the parsha of yibum. The Torah says, asher lo yolad. She's got to be a basileda. She's not a basileda, so it was never in the field of the yibum, and therefore a tzara is not a tzaras erva. Even though, at the time of the marriage of Rabbi Abba to the daughter of Gamliel, his brother, meaning marrying his niece, he knew well, he was well advised from the get-go that she was an islandess. Iba is saying, but the Gemara now offers an alternative explanation of machlokes between Tanakama and Acherim. According to the Tanakama, the daughter of Rabbi Gamliel was not an islandess. There was another reason why Rabbi Gamliel was allowed to be miyabim the tzara of his daughter, and that's because of Gerush. What happened is, according to this second Lishna, Abba, the brother of Gamliel, divorced his wife, meaning the daughter of Gamliel. He was married at one point to the daughter of Gamliel and then subsequently divorced her. And when he passed away, and there was an afila for Yibum, the tzara was not a tzaras erva, because at that moment, the shas nefila, the erva was no longer married to the late brother, to Abba in this case. And what that means is that according to this answer in the Gemara, since she wasn't, the tzara was not a tzara of the bas of Ram Gamliel, because the late brother Abba had already divorced his wife, meaning the bas of Ram Gamliel. So therefore there was a heter yibum. Now, you might ask, well, what about the acherim in this brisa? Why didn't they accept that heter? And they had to assume, no, that the daughter of Gamliel was an islandess. And the answer is because kodem nosa ha'aches hatzov rak li'achar mikan girches Abbas. First, Abba married the daughter of Ram Gamliel, and then subsequently, I'm sorry. What I meant to say was first, Abba married the tzara of the bas, and then afterwards he divorced the bas. And kanas u'lebesof gerish ika beinayim, meaning that according to the acherim, the tzara is not muteres unless she married the late brother after the gerish into the erfa. But if at some point in time the late brother was married to both the tzara and the erva, they overlapped in marriage, the gerushin came subsequently, then in such a case, we apply a principle which is called nisuin mapilin liibum. And she, the tzara, has the status of a tzaras erva because at the time of her nisuin, she was the tzara of an erva. So the machlokas is whether you go baso shas misa, and that's the shas nefila of the yibum, which is called misa mapeles, or do we say no, nisuin mapila? Ibai sema. Now the Gemara offers another explanation to the machlok shin Tanakam and Acherim in terms of the heter of tzaras bito shel Rab Gamliel fi'imu. And we're talking about a case where Abba, the brother of Gamliel, made a t'nai in his kiddushin. After he made the t'nai in kiddushin, he consummated the marriage with Be'ilah. And yesh t'nai b'bi'a ika b'nai. Notice the Tanakam is of the opinion that the t'nai is meaningful, despite the fact that they consummated the marriage, and therefore, if there was bittul t'nai, she was never married to him. Therefore, the tzara is not a tzaras erva. However, acherim sovrim, according to the acherim, there's no meaningful t'nai, there's no validity or there's no legal recognition of the efficacy of a t'nai in a case where after the t'nai in Kiddushin he had be'ilu with him, because we're going to apply the principle of ein adam osa bi'los bi'los, and at the time of the be'ilu he was mochel on the t'nai. Masechet Rabbi Sharsha wants to object to those who say that Beit Shammai lo asu k'divrei, they were mevatel edas to Beis Hillel. And here we have a Mishnah at the beginning of Rosh Hashanah. When is Rosh Hashanah Lilanos? Beit Shammai hold Aleph Shvat, and Beis Hillel hold Tu B'Shvat. And then Afkamina is going to be Maaser, because if you have Maaser that is between Aleph Shvat and Tu B'Shvat, let's say in the second year going into the third year, so the question is, are you Chayiv Meiser Sheni or Meiser Oni? And Rabbi Akiva was machmir for both Beit Shammai and Beis Hillel, which means, based on the shita of Beit Shammai, he assumed that we were already in the new year during that 2-week period of time between Aleph Shvat and Tu B'Shvat, and therefore the chiyuv was Meiser Oni in the third year of the Shemitah cycle. On the other hand, he gave Meiser Sheni Kidas Beis Hillel, because Beis Hillel hold that it's not Rosh Hashanah Lilanos until Tu B'Shvat, and therefore these payrolls had a din of the previous year, the second year of the Shemitah cycle, which means they were chayav Ma'aser Sheni. Ma'aser Rabbi Akiva shaliket esrog bi'echad b'Shvat ve'anad bo shnei isurim. So it's already after Shkia on Rosh Chodesh Shvat, and therefore, according to Beis Shammai, we already entered into the third year, and the Lakita of the Esrog now gives the status of the Esrog as the third year, which means Ma'aser Oni is Echad, meaning Ma'aser Oni Kedivrei Beit Shammai, Echad Kedivrei Beis Hillel. According to Beis Hillel, we haven't yet gotten to B'Shvat, to the new year. Therefore, belongs to the previous year. That's Shniya, the second year of the Shemitah cycle, and therefore you have Ma'aser Sheni. Shma Mina Asu. If Rabbi Akiva was machmir like Beit Shammai to require Ma'aser Ani, meaning of the third year, then obviously Asu Kedivrayim, that the Shita Beit Shammai was perpetuated and they were implementing the Shita Beit Shammai. The Gemara rejects this and says no. Rabbi Akiva was going according to Beis Hillel, but he doesn't know when was Rosh Hashanah Lilanos according to Beis Hillel. Gamre, Gemare is Tapkale. Gemare means the Shmua. He had a suffix about the Shmua from Rabbosa. So he didn't know when was Rosh Hashanah Lilanos according to the Shita Beit Shammai of Beis Hillel, whether or not it was Aleph Shvat or Tu B'Shvat, and therefore there was no Ichnei Isurim. Massive Marzutra objects again to the Maniyom who says Lo Asu Beit Shammai Kidvei, they were Mevatel Das, because we learned in Sukkah on Daf Chav Ches a story about Shammai HaZaken. We have a principle called Katan She'eno Tzarech Li'imo. There's a mitzvah of chinuch for Sukkah. If he's tzarech li'imo, he's potter. That's the opinion of Beis Hillel. Beit Shammai holds that a katan, even if he's tzarech li'imo, he's still a very young child, there is chinuch. And in fact, that psak, that ruling of Beit Shammai, was implemented by Shammai HaZaken. He removed some of the ceiling above the head of the child. It was a newborn baby, and he put schach on top. You see that he was offering tzel sukkah for a katan who is still very much tzarech li'imo, and that would implement the shita of Beit Shammai. Shma Mina also. We see that the shita of Beit Shammai was implemented. The Gemara says, Chasam, Haroa Omer, Lafushe Avir Ka'avid. The only reason why Beit Shammai would have been Mevatel Das is in order to avoid the violation of Lo Sisko, the do of Agudas Agudos, which means Nirakish State Toros. Here it wouldn't be Nirakish State Toros. The people would say the reason why he took off the Maziva was only because he wanted to add some air. You know, it was very stuffy, and he was adding air, so there would not be any violation of Nirakish State Toros. Now we have Machlokas Beis Hillel Beit Shammai about the shear of nekev. What kind of a nekev? A hole. We're talking about a case where you have a mikveh that has less than arboim sa, and there's another mikveh which is proximate that has arboim sa. So what you do is you puncture a hole, allowing the water to go in from one mikveh, the mikveh kosher, into the mikveh that's chaser, and that's going to be machshir the mikveh. So Beit Shammai holds that the shear of a nekev is what's called tipaches dofno berubo. He really has to take off the dofen that separates one mikveh from the other most of the way. That's being porates rov orech v'rochav hadofan hameshutav lo ula mikvah kosher. Beis Hillel say no. All you need is a nekev, the godol shvoferes hanod, meaning it's the size of a shvoferes hanod. It's like a straw that goes into a cup. You know, you put two fingers in it, you can roll around your two fingers. That's enough of a nekev. Masiv Marzutra raised an objection according to the Maniyah, who says Lo Asu by Shammai Kedivrayim. and they were mevatel their das to the das of Beis Hillel. Ma'aseh b'shokes yehu. Right, shokes is like a stone that you dig it out, and this particular and you collect water there, so the water comes down pipes from the mountain and so forth that goes into this shokes. And the Ma'aseh was Haisa b'Yushalayim, and it didn't have 40 saw. Well, Haisa nekuva l'mikvah. So they made a hole in the stone in order to allow the mikveh kasha that had arbon, so to go, the water could go through this nekev, and the nekev had a shear of shvoferes hanod, which according to Beis Hillel is sufficient. The kol atar shahayu b'Yushalayim nasim al gava, and they were matbil kelim in this shokes yehu. But sholchu Beit Shammai were upset about this. This is not enough of a nekev. We have to remove most of the dolphin. So Beit Shammai sent out shluchim to this location called Shokes Yehu V'Rchivu, and they widened that nekev shebeit Shammai omrim ad shetipochas beruba. Now, Mar Zutra is going to finish up his kasha. V'tnan, and we have a Mishnah in Masechet Mikvos Perek Vav that according to Beis Hillel, eruv mikvos kishvoferes hanot bi'ovya u'bechalala. So the ofi defanos of the shoferes, together with the rochav chalala, who kishir shtei etzbos. So that means that they didn't need to be tipaches rubo. That was only Beit Shammai. B'chosum koma, meaning that the fingers go around and around and come out. So that's the shear of shtei etzbos, of shvoferes hanod. But it seems that Beit Shammai weren't relying on the sheet of Beis Hillel. They were requiring ad shetipochas beruba. The nekev has to be wider and wider and wider in order to attach the two mikvos. But we see asu kidivreim shmamina asu, and the Gemara is going to try to reject that proof.